Well, welcome again. I'm so glad that you're all here. This is a good day. I'm going to be talking about this. Well, we're in this pre-decide series, very practical, where we're trying to realize that the choices that we make, affect our lives in such a great way. We're saying we want to pre-decide some things so that when the trouble comes, we're ready. And temptation is probably one of the best ways to do that, and that's the focus of today. I want to do a quick review. Probably if I had to summarize last week's message, we started the series off, it's very introductory, but basically we said that the quality of your decisions determine the quality of your life. And so what we decide to do, right, we say, we make our decisions, really our decisions make us. The things we decide to do direct our future. If we decide to choose wisely, to follow the Lord, to help others, right? Those determine what's going on in our life. And so, but today I'm really excited. We're talking about the keys to overcoming temptation. And that's the focus today. And so I want to talk specifically, how can we pre-decide things now that will help us in the moments of our weakness and temptation? Are there things that we can do to prepare for that? And this is very powerful. Because I think most of us have certain areas of our life where we're weak. And when temptation comes and we're not prepared, we're not ready, it can overtake us. And so I want to give you hope. Maybe you feel like I'm just a terrible sinner, I struggle with everything. And I want to give you hope that we can pre-decide some things today that will prepare us for those upcoming temptations. So that's how I want to talk about how can we cooperate with God so that we can stand firm when temptation comes. Because I think one of the most frustrating parts of the Christian life is when we fall into temptation. And especially the things where it's like, well, I just did that, and now I'm doing it again. Why do I keep falling here? Because I believe we don't want to sin. I believe as Christians, as followers of Christ, our goal is to not sin. So I think of Paul and what he wrote in the Romans. He said, I don't want to sin, but then I end up doing it. How do I get out of this? How do I fix this? And so when we find ourselves, on the ground, taken down by temptation and sin, that's a frustration. And so we wonder, why did this happen? Why did I let this happen? How did this go on this way? And I think in many cases the answer is we aren't prepared, and we thought we were strong enough to stand against it. We found out we weren't. So point number one, when it comes to temptation, you are not as smart and as strong as you think. Right? The Bible reminds us that sin and temptation are battles we will continually fight, and that we need to be prepared. 1 Corinthians 16:13 says, be on guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong. So temptation says it's a battle. And our enemy, the devil, he wants to break us. He wants to lead us into temptation and watch us fail. And so we're encouraged, be strong, be faithful. And I believe a key part of that is to be prepared. And pre-deciding is a way of being prepared for when temptation comes. When Jesus was just minutes away from being arrested, and then he was going to go and be killed, crucified on the cross, he was praying, and he asked his disciples to pray. For years, I always was thinking in my mind, well, Jesus is praying because he knows he's going to go to the cross, and all the weight of the sin of the world is coming on him, and so he must, he's probably asking the disciples to pray about that, but that's not what he's asking them to pray for. He's praying that they will pray so that they don't fall into temptation. Here's what he says in Matthew 26:41. He's out praying because he's about to go to the cross, but he's saying to them, keep watch and pray so that you will not give into temptation, for the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Jesus knew that when he would be arrested and killed, that they would fall into great temptation and fall away. He says, you need to pray and be ready for that. I like he says, our spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Spiritually, we don't want to do nothing but serve the Lord. But then this body we live in, it generally just wants comfort, and it wants to feel good, and I'm always amazed. I've been a Christian for many years, but I get a little bit tired or cranky in the evening, and all of a sudden I can start to say snarky things and be like, nasty. I'm like, how does that happen? I need to be better prepared for that, because I know we don't want to be sin. I want to be faithful. I don't want to be lazy or irresponsible. My intent is to love others, not to choose selfishness, right? But our physical bodies are weak, and we fall into temptation. That's our natural state. So there's this battle going on with temptation and sin all the time. But spiritually, I'm like, I want God's will to be done in the world and in my life. And so this is why Jesus told his disciples, you need to keep watch and pray, because temptation's coming. So that's why today we're going to pre-decide some things so that we will be prepared when temptation comes upon us and be sure that it will come upon us. But it's not enough to just wander through life hoping we're going to stand. Let's see what comes up and I'll fight the battle, especially in the areas where we're weak. The devil and his agents have been tempting people for thousands of years. They're really good at it. They know you and me, they know our weaknesses, and they have great strategies to take us down. And so if we rely on our own strength, we're probably going to fall into temptation. 1 Corinthians 10:12 reminds us, if you think you're standing strong, be careful not to fall. You start to think, I'm pretty good, I can stand strong. That's when we need to be careful. We tend to think we can handle more than we can actually handle. And, our strength and our willpower, there's something to that. Some days that might help you to stand, but it's limited, and it's an unpredictable resource, this willpower of ours, and many times, a lot of times, it's not enough. And it's easy to get overconfident in what we can do. So my challenge today is that we would pre-decide some things to help us fight temptations. That's where we're going. And so point number 2, this is the heart of the message, keys to fighting temptation. I want to talk about some things that I think will help us and ways we can pre-decide that will do that. So the first thing that I believe is the key is we need to move the line. We need to move the line. Like, what are you talking about? Well, when it comes to sin and temptation, most of us are aware there's sort of this line. And on this side of the line, it's we're honoring God. We're doing his will. We're doing what's right. On this side of the line, where we don't want to go, this is disobedience. This is sin. This side is, I want to do God's will. This side is, I'm going to do my will. Right? So there's this line. And what most of us do in life is we kind of wander around this side. And sometimes we'll, I'm still good. I haven't sinned yet, and it's all good. But in some days, when we're feeling really strong, we're like, look at that, man. I'm not over the line. Look what I did. But what happens if I stumble right now? Right? There's a good chance, the saying says if you play on the line, eventually you're going to fall over. Right? And so what I'm suggesting is we move the line. This is the line where sin is. But what if we decide we're going to place our own personal line over here somewhere, so that even if I get close to it, when I step over here, I'm still not over where that original line was, right? So we're kind of creating a boundary for us. Now, when I was, I'm going to put this back in, so we'll leave it there. But when I was, one of my temptations as a young man was when I would go into convenience stores was the dirty magazines. And I would find myself, I'd go over there, and I kind of like glance over. And on a bad day, I might pick one up and thumb through it. And so I finally reached a point, I said, I got to move my line. Because if my line is don't pick it up or don't look at it, I'm always really close. I said, I'm going to change the line. And so I decided I have to go, when I go into these stores, I need to not even go down that aisle. Because if I don't go down the aisle with the magazines in it, I won't even see them, let alone pick it up. Now, there's all sorts of ways we can do this. Like, one of my weaknesses is getting angry in traffic. And I realized, you're probably sick of hearing about that. But I thought one way that I can move the line is not be running late. Because when I'm running late or I'm hurrying, I've got to drive faster, and all these cars are in my way, irritating me. So if I go 5 or 10 minutes early and someone cuts me off so I don't make the next light, it doesn't matter. I got plenty of time to get there, right? So that's a way of moving the line for me. Now, maybe you're the kind of person where you just really struggle to make it to church. And so sometimes I've talked to people, it's just so hard for me to get up and come to church. I said, well, when'd you go to bed last night? Like 1 or 2 or 3. I was up watching a late movie. I said, well, maybe you should go to bed earlier. One way you can move the line, if you're struggling to get up to come to church on Sunday morning because you're staying up till 1, 2, 3, and you're tired, maybe you should go to bed at midnight or 11 o'clock. So after you get a full night's sleep, you can get up and still have time to make it. That's a way of moving the line. So there's ways we can make these adjustments. By moving the line, we can avoid temptation altogether. The things that get you when you're right up against it and get you to step over, you completely avoid. It's like, imagine, sometimes we get right up to the line. Imagine if like an airline pilot was like, they're like, I gotta clear this mountain and I gotta be 2,000 feet off the ground. So I'll set it for 2002. That should be good enough, right? You don't want a pilot like that, right? You want them to move that line. So I'm going to be 3,000 feet, or like we need like maybe 150 gallons to get where we're going. So I'll put 152 in there. No, we want you to fill the tank so that there's no, like we want you to move that line so there's not even any chance of it, right? See, we can do this in the area of temptation. We can find ways to move that line because the reality is if I'm so far away from where the temptation drags me over, that it's better to avoid it than have to fight it. Maybe there's certain places you go, or certain people in your life, or certain situations that just seem to always lead you to temptation. Maybe you can find some way to move the line so you don't go somewhere where you're tempted. So this is a major pre-decision, we can say. I know sin's over here, but I'm going to move my line because when I get too close to it, and then the devil attacks me, it's my area of weakness. I end up falling, stepping over, and I'm down. So first thing we can do is move the line. Second thing I think we can pre-decide is to be honest about the cost of sin. All sin comes with a cost and with a risk. And what can make it tricky is sometimes we can sin, and it seems like there aren't very many consequences. Maybe it's God's mercy, or we didn't get caught. We're like, not that big of a deal. I did the deed, and it's almost like you got away with it because the consequences weren't severe. Because not every sin is punished. Not every sin that we do is discovered by others. It's almost like we got a pass. Maybe when you got really mad and lost control, your temper and said those things, your kids weren't around, your good friends weren't around. They don't know it. It's almost like I got away with it, right? So the reality is that sin has very severe consequences. It can wreck our lives. You can lose your reputation. You can lose your integrity. You could lose your job from some sins. You could lose your marriage. You could go bankrupt. You can lose the respect of your children. Some sins will take us down. And I think sometimes the smaller ones, or the ones that don't seem to have as severe consequences, can almost make us not take it so seriously. There's a verse in Numbers when this is in the law of Moses, and they're like, you gotta follow the Lord. And it says, but if you fail to keep your word, promise to serve the Lord, it says, then you will have sinned against the Lord, and you may be sure that your sin will find you out. So if we think we can just skirt on the edge and get away with it, it's not the way it is. It's easy to think that small little sins aren't a big deal, and so it can affect our attitude. And even if nothing goes wrong, the consequences of sin is death. It's spiritual death. Sometimes it can be physical death or other consequences, but sometimes it seems easy. And so one of the classic moves of the devil is to get us to minimize the sin, to justify it. It's just a little thing. It's not really a lie. It's like a fib or a white lie, right? We find ways to do that, You can lust after someone and say, well, I didn't do anything. I was just looking. Like we find ways to say, My anger is justified because they provoked me. Right? We can find ways to make it seem like it's not really our fault. And one thing I've observed and experienced personally is that it's easy to use your disappointments to justify your disobedience. Right? It's almost like something bad happened. It's almost like I get a pass or something because they said that to me. And I deserve to lash out in anger or whatever. They disappointed me, so that can justify my disobedience, but it doesn't. My boss didn't give me a raise, so it's okay if I take all these office supplies. He owes me. Right? We can find ways to, our disappointments, we use them sometimes to do that. My spouse didn't give me enough attention, so I'm justified in looking elsewhere for love. So I think we need to pre-decide to be realistic about sin and its consequences. The cost of sin is it leads to spiritual death. And relationally, it drives a wedge between us and God. When we sin, we're saying, I don't want to do your will, God. I'm doing what I want. I'm doing it my way. Repeated sin, we can come up with excuses and justifications. So, a couple really great ways to pre-decide some things to help us in this battle of temptation. First, move the line, and then second, be honest and realistic about the cost of sin. Don't pretend like it's not a big deal, it's just something little. And then the third one that I think will really help us is to plan your escape. Plan your escape. I thought to show how old I am, I was thinking of playing that Pina Colada song. Some of you don't know what I'm talking about. It's a song from the 70s. It was a pop thing. It was really silly. So we can pre-decide, I'm going to plan my escape from these temptations that seem to always overcome me. And probably the best example, or my favorite example in the Bible, is Joseph from the Old Testament. He was one of Jacob's sons. He was one of the 12 sons, the 12 tribes. And he unfortunately was sold. His brothers really were jealous of him, and they were severe. They sold him to people. He became enslaved in Egypt, and he's there working for this guy, and his title was Potiphar. That's not his name, it was his title. He was a pretty important official, and Potiphar's wife really liked Joseph and was trying to get him to sleep with her. And so from Genesis 39, it says Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man. They think he was probably late teens, early 20s, a young guy in great shape. And Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. Come and sleep with me, she demanded. And so, this is a tough situation for Joseph. He's enslaved. He can't control what he's doing. You could just say, well, the boss's wife said it. There's not very much I could do about it. Right? Could have found excuses, and she's the one coming on to me. But this happened repeatedly, and I'm convinced that Joseph came up with a plan. There's going to come a day when I'm going to be trapped. What am I going to do? And of course, the day came. It was just Joseph and the boss's wife in the house. And she grabbed him. She literally got a hold of him and his coat. His big plan of escape was run. Right? You keep the coat that you got a grip on, I'm out of here. So in Genesis 39:12 it says, Joseph tore himself away, but he left his cloak in her hand as he ran from the house. I'm convinced that wasn't just a spur of the moment thought. I think he's like, someday she's going to corner me, she's going to get me, and what am I going to do? And he ran. I love that. But Joseph had pre-decided he was going to honor God. He didn't want to sin. But he knew this was a tempt. He couldn't move the line here. He couldn't avoid this temptation. He couldn't just say, well, you're not allowed in the house when I'm here, right? He didn't have any say. And so he had to plan some escape. And he decided ahead of time. He got in that situation, he was going to run. Now, the good news about temptation is that God has given us, as his people, the assurance that we can fight all temptation and be strong. And that God has provided some way out, some way of escape. And so I believe that pre-deciding is one of the tools that God has given us to stand strong in our faith. From 1 Corinthians 10:13, it talks about this very issue. It says, and God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure. That's a great promise and a great hope. Because I think sometimes we think, I gave in, I couldn't do it, I'm not strong enough. Well, you weren't. That doesn't mean you aren't or you can't be. And so one of the ways we can endure and stand strong against temptations is pre-decide a plan of escape. Sometimes the best way to fight temptation is to avoid it and to run from it. Yeah. So point 3, I think, we got to personalize this, but we want to pre-decide, I'm putting distance between myself and temptation. This is really the heart of fighting temptation. Or maybe like avoid, why fight it when you can avoid it, right? How can I move the line to a place to protect myself from falling into temptation? How can I not, water it down and say, oh, it's no big deal what I did, everybody does. Take sin seriously and then have an escape plan, like Joseph did. And so that leads us to wonder, what temptations do you know are coming your way? The ones that always hit you, the ones you're going to face this week, the areas where you're weakest. And, let's figure out how to pre-decide how to fight them, to move that line, to plan that escape, to take it very seriously. Because the goal is to put as much distance as we can between us and temptation, which rewording it in point number 4 is, why would I resist temptation in the future if I have the power to eliminate it today? Right? If you pre-decide some things, it keeps you from having to fight the temptations that take you down a lot by pre-deciding, and I'm going to not even be anywhere near when that happens. Because that's the best way to fight temptation, avoid it altogether. So the real issue we need to face today is, what pre-decisions should we make? This is going to be very personal. But it begins with, what temptations have been getting the better of us, that we're losing the battle? What is a way to move the line? What's a way to escape from it so we don't even have to face it? I think the best place to start is the ones that are where the temptation's winning the battle in our lives. And figure out, what can I change? What can I do? How can I move the line? How can I avoid the temptation? Because pre-deciding is this powerful tool. We're setting ourselves up to cooperate and follow God and not give in. Because I know, if you're like me, temptation and giving in to temptation just bugs me. And usually because back to point number 1, how we think we're stronger, usually my first reaction is this, why did I do that? I shouldn't do that. Well, it's a weak spot, and I wasn't prepared. And I'm not really taking it as seriously as I can. So I think this is a great way for us to overcome temptation. So I want to look to next steps. The first one, I think, really deals with that first point about thinking we can do it all in our own strength. And I can admit, I need God's help and strength. I can't find temptation on my own. If you're relying on yourself and your willpower, it's going to work a little bit at the time, but you're not going to have success. The second one, when I'm faced with temptation, the one that seems to drag me down, I pre-decide to. This is a big one. This might take you a while to figure this one out. Odds are you already know the temptation. You know the things that really get you. What can you do? How can you take it more seriously? How can you move the line? What kind of escape do you need? And maybe number 3 works with this. I'm going to talk to a friend about what I can do to prepare for the temptations I battle. There's a lot of, the Bible says it's really good for us to confess. Find someone who's a good friend. You can just say, this thing is beating me, and I don't want to live there anymore. And there's great strength in numbers, having someone on your side. There's great strength and power in just saying it out loud. This is a problem I have. No longer a secret. And then the last one, pre-decide to attend the rest of this series. There's 5 more. And it's going to hit different areas of our life. What can we do to make decisions now so that in the future, our life will be better and closer to following along with God. That's what the Pre-Decide series is about. So think about what next step can you take. And this is really hard. I mean, maybe you're like, I'm going to take the next step, but I'm not going to put it on the card and give it to you. I'm just going to keep it. That's fine, right? But let's use the tools that God has given us so that we can succeed spiritually and walk closer with Him. I want to pray for you as you consider taking next steps. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, this area of temptation is so personal. It's hard for us even to talk about sometimes, but we want to stand strong, stand firm, like the Scripture says. We pray, help us, Lord, to know what we can do. Is there a way we can move our line so that we don't play right up against where the sin is and we're just, we fall over? How can we escape from it? And so we seek your wisdom and your guidance in this. And we pray, help us. We want to overcome temptation and find that way of escape that you promise in our lives. We pray, help us in Jesus'